Welcome to another deep dive. We try to take these really complex global events and, make some sense of them for you.
Hopefully give you some clarity.
Exactly. And today we're looking at a situation that's honestly got a lot of people worried, asking, are we looking at something like World War III?
It's a stark question, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're diving into the really rapid escalation between Iran, the U.S., and Israel. Things really kicked off, or rather intensified, around June 22nd, 2025.
Yeah, just days ago. This isn't some abstract threat. It feels very immediate.
It really does. Our goal today, our mission, is to unpack what just happened, the immediate moves by everyone involved, and then explore those ripple effects, globally.
Because it does affect everyone.
Absolutely. We want to get past the headlines and understand the why behind it all. Why now? Why these actions?
So stick with us. What does this all mean for you? Is there a path back from the edge, or is this heading somewhere much bigger? Let's try and unpack it.
Yeah.
So the big flashpoint, the thing that really escalated things dramatically, seems to be June 22nd. This U.S. operation, codenamed Midnight Hammer.
That's right. B-2 stealth bombers involved. We're talking serious hardware.
And serious ordnance. These 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs hitting Fordo, Natanz, Isfahan, key Iranian nuclear sites.
Deeply buried sites, too. That's what those bombs are for. And President Trump came out very quickly calling it a spectacular success.
His words were, Iran's nuclear program is toast. Strong language.
Very strong. But what's really crucial here, I think, is the context. This wasn't just the U.S. acting alone, out of the blue.
No, it was coordinated with Israel.
Exactly. And Israel had already been active, conducting strikes against Iranian targets since June 13th. So nearly 10 days of Israeli operations targeting similar infrastructure, nuclear sites, military bases, even commanders.
So Midnight Hammer was like the culmination, or at least a major escalation point in something already underway.
It seems that way. It looks less like an impulsive reaction and more like, perhaps, a planned convergence of operations. A phased approach.
And the damage, we've seen satellite photos, right? Maxar Technologies.
Yes, those images, particularly of Fordo, were striking. Craterfest was the description used.
Which sounds pretty definitive. Experts are estimating, a 2 to 5 year setback for Iran's program?
That's the assessment, yes. A significant delay, potentially.
But Iran's public reaction has been quite different. They're downplaying it.
They are. They're insisting the damage isn't as severe as reported. Which, raises questions.
Is it just spin, trying to save face? Or is there something strategic there?
You could be a mix of things. Domestically, projecting strength is vital. You don't want panic. Internationally, maybe they don't want to seem completely crippled, perhaps preserving some ambiguity about their remaining capabilities or setting the stage for their own response.
Right, managing expectations.
It's information warfare alongside the kinetic stuff, denying the enemy a clear narrative victory.
Well, they certainly didn't stay quiet. Iran responded pretty fast. Ballistic missiles, drones, aimed at Israel.
Yes, an immediate retaliation. Reports mentioned at least 10 people injured in Israel from that barrage.
Which brings up a key question. After taking such a heavy hit themselves, how much real capacity did Iran have left to hit back hard? Was this response more symbolic, or did it show significant remaining strength?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Look, Iran has a lot of missiles and drones. It's a known capability. But launching a barrage like that after your own key sites are hit, it suggests they prioritized showing resolve.
Showing they can still strike back.
Exactly. But perhaps it was also carefully calibrated. Enough to make a statement, but maybe not enough to trigger an absolutely overwhelming U.S. or Israeli counter response. The relatively low reported casualties in Israel might suggest that, though it's hard to know for sure about their targeting success or Israel's defenses.
It's a dangerous calculation.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the casualty figures from the U.S. and Israeli strikes in Iran, they're all over the place.
Hugely different numbers. Yeah, Iran's own health ministry put out figures over 430 dead, 3,500 injured.
But then you have groups like human rights activists in Iran.
Right, and they're suggesting the death toll could be much higher, closer to 950.
That's a massive difference. Is this just the fog of war, or is someone deliberately manipulating these numbers?
Probably both. Initial reports are always chaotic, but yes, there's absolutely an incentive to shape the narrative. Iran might inflate numbers for sympathy, or maybe the rights groups have better on-the-ground access in some areas. It's part of that information war we mentioned.
And the rhetoric didn't cool down. Ali Akbar Velayati, advisor to the supreme leader.
A very senior figure.
He basically put U.S. bases on notice, specifically named Al Udeid in Qatar as a target.
A major U.S. hub in the region. That's a significant threat escalation. And then we got those unconfirmed reports, just this morning?
Yeah, whispers that Iran might have actually already struck Al Udeid. Unconfirmed, we have to stress that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But if that turns out to be true, wow, that pushes things into a whole new category. Direct Iran-U.S. military exchange. That's the kind of thing people worry about spiraling very, very quickly.
And while all this is happening, Israel isn't sitting idle either. Netanyahu made that comment about being this close.
It's as close to wiping out Iran's nuclear and missile programs.
Okay.
Yeah, very assertive language.
And they followed up with more strikes in western Iran. Reports of taking out specific figures like this Banem Shariari, allegedly linked to arming Hezbollah.
So continued pressure, continued targeting, which makes the Israeli diplomatic messaging fascinating.
How so?
Well, you have Netanyahu saying they're close to wiping out the program and continued strikes. But then Israel's UN ambassador, Yaron Seidman, is arguing that these very actions are meant to stop World War III.
Right, that framing is interesting. How can bombing potentially prevent a wider war?
It's the logic of preemption, pushed to its extreme. The argument is, Iran getting a bomb is the path to World War III, so we must stop them now, even forcefully, to prevent that worse outcome.
A preventative war logic.
Essentially, yes. They're trying to frame themselves not as aggressors, but as actors taking necessary, if harsh, steps to maintain regional and even global security. It's a narrative battle playing out at the UN and in global capitals.
Let's widen the lens then, the global reaction. How is the rest of the world responding to this?
It's fractured, as you might expect. Russia, for instance, Putin voiced alarm. They're particularly worried about any Russian personnel who might have been at those Iranian nuclear sites.
That adds another layer of complexity, Russian involvement or potential casualties?
Definitely. Iran, meanwhile, went straight to the UN, called for an emergency meeting, and labeled the U.S. a heinous criminal, trying to isolate the U.S. diplomatically.
And beyond the major powers.
Mixed bag. Turkey is talking about Islamic unity, trying to rally regional sentiment. Latin American countries seem split, some calling for calm and diplomacy, others condemning the U.S. strikes.
So no unified global front demanding de-escalation, really.
Not in a way that seems to be having an immediate effect, no. It shows how complex alliances and interests are right now.
And this instability, it hits the economy, doesn't it? We saw oil prices jump.
Immediately. Brent crude went over $80 a barrel. That's a direct consequence people feel.
And the big fear is always the Strait of Hormuz.
Exactly. That's the jugular for global oil. About 20% of the world's oil flows through there. If Iran were to try and close it,
the economic impact would be catastrophic.
Devastating. Especially for countries like India, heavily reliant on Gulf oil. It would cripple economies far beyond the Middle East. We'd see supply chain chaos, potential recession.
And we're already seeing practical signs of the tension, right? U.S. bases on high alert, airspace closures?
Yes, Bahrain, the UAE closing airspace. Those are concrete indicators of just how high the perceived risk is right now for everyone operating in the region.
Okay, let's bring it back to the domestic situations. In the U.S., President Trump isn't getting a free pass on this.
No, definitely not. Democrats particularly are raising major objections about launching strikes without explicit congressional approval. Questions about legality, constitutionality.
And protests have started in some U.S. cities.
Right. It highlights the domestic divisions over foreign intervention, especially something this significant. And in an election year, that political heat is amplified.
How much does that domestic pressure actually constrain a president in a situation like this?
It can. It forces the administration to expend political capital defending the action at home. It can potentially shape public opinion. And Congress does have oversight powers, even if they're sometimes slow to assert them. It adds another layer of calculation for the White House.
Now, looking at Iran internally, you mentioned their economy is struggling, military stretched.
Yes, sanctions have hit hard. The recent strikes obviously damaged key assets, and reports suggest their missile stocks might be lower than they'd like. They face real constraints.
But they have allies, proxies.
Crucially, yes. Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen. These groups are well-armed, battle-hardened, and could open up new fronts against Israel or U.S. interests. That's Iran's asymmetric advantage, potentially widening the conflict beyond direct state-on-state action.
Which complicates any simple calculation of Iranian weakness. Then there's Trump's rhetoric demanding unconditional surrender and those rumors about aiming for regime change. How realistic is that?
Look, unconditional surrender is maximalist language, often used for political effect or as an opening negotiating stance. Regime change. Well, history is littered with failed or disastrous attempts at externally imposed regime change.
It rarely goes to plan.
Rarely. The Iranian regime, despite its economic woes and internal dissent, has deep roots in the security apparatus and often benefits from nationalist sentiment when facing foreign pressure. So achieving regime change through military or economic means alone, it's an incredibly tall order, hugely risky, and unpredictable. It might be more about rhetoric than a concrete, achievable short-term goal.
And amidst all this high-stakes geopolitics, you have the online world, the World War III memes, the panic.
Yeah, it's almost instantaneous now. Platforms like X, formerly Twitter, they just ignite. You see fear, speculation, heated arguments, misinformation, all spreading like wildfire.
It shapes the mood, doesn't it? Even if it's detached from the strategic reality sometimes.
Absolutely. It creates a climate of anxiety and can even influence public pressure on governments. That information environment is now an inseparable part of any major conflict.
So after digging into all of this, where does it leave us? Back to that initial question. Are we staring down a much wider war, or is there still a chance for diplomacy to pull things back?
The situation is incredibly volatile. The potential for miscalculation is huge. But there are always off-ramps, potential de-escalation channels.
Who might play a role there?
Well, you mentioned countries caught in the middle, like India. Heavily reliant on that oil, strategic ties with various players. Countries like that, perhaps others, might have an interest and potentially some leverage in pushing for talks, mediating, finding ways to lower the temperature. It shows how interconnected everything is. One nation's energy security depends on stability halfway across the world.
It really underscores the global stakes.
It does. And maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to consider, related to that online panic we talked about.
Okay.
In this era where scary headlines, unconfirmed reports, and social media reactions can spread so fast and feel so overwhelming, how do we as individuals trying to stay informed navigate that?
Yeah.
How do we separate the signal from the noise, the real risk from the amplified fear, when conflicts are fought not just with bombs, but with bites and perceptions?
That's a really important point. Discerning credible information in the middle of a crisis is challenging.
It really is. Something to mull over, how we consume and react to information in these tense moments.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the situation remains incredibly fluid, and the need to stay informed critically is paramount. Keep asking questions, keep seeking out reliable sources. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.